Hello and welcome to the Cloaked Hedgehog's YouTube channel. This is going to be a somewhat different episode, and I'm going to be talking about the banana area. The banana area is a roughly banana-shaped area that stretches from Saskatchewan in Canada through North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, parts of Texas, and down towards Mexico. It's an area that has exactly 0 Dogman sightings. It's kind of a huge area. Seems a little bit off that they wouldn't be there at all. So the reasons for this, obviously it's not a super ultra mega populated area, but people do live there. The banana of safety, as I have dubbed it, is shortgrass prairie. It has virtually no trees, and since it's so bloody flat, there's really nowhere to hide there, unless you happen to use cornfields and other fields of various kinds when crops are growing. For the rest of the year, I don't see how anyone could hide from anything out there. Had the world not been round, you could probably see from like North Dakota to south of Texas because it's so flat there. If we look at a population map and superimpose that on my Dogman map, we can see using this light pollution map that it's not a highly populated area by any means. Though, if we dim that down a little bit, we can see that though it's not super populated in the whole banana area, there are still areas within the area that are relatively populated. We can also see that there are areas that aren't densely populated that still have quite a lot of Dogman sightings. So, is it a population issue, this? Is it just that fewer people live there and therefore don't report them, or is it something else? It could be a little bit of this, but I also think it could be a little bit of this. This is an altitude map superimposed on my Dogman map. Then we can kind of clearly see that the banana area is turquoise blue on this, indicating that the altitude in this area is between 2,000 and 4,000 feet. Why would that be important, we wonder? If we then mark those blue turquoise areas, because it seems to be like in between there, because there are more than just the banana area. There's a little bit in good lord, my brain just died. Arizona, there's a little bit in Arizona, and California, a little bit in Nevada, up in Oregon, and Washington, and some other obscure places, and also a little bit there around Virginia, Kentucky. Well, you can see over there on the East Coast we have some areas. And now if we make this more transparent so we can see that those marked areas are surprisingly Dogman-free everywhere, except some obnoxious little one in North Carolina and one in West Virginia. But other than that, they seem to be very Dogman-free, these turquoise blue areas. So why would they exist in altitudes up to 2,000 feet and above 4,000 feet, but not between 2,000 and 4,000 feet? I have no idea, but that's what it looks like. I think it could be a mix between this altitude business and the fact that the banana area isn't so densely populated. But I really think that the main reason is the lack of forests and the lack of mountains and caves. That's what I think. While I'm doing the banana area, I'm gonna talk about the Wyoming sightings and also the Idaho one, since, well, it's just there, not connected to anything else, so it might as well be told in this episode. The Montana sighting and one of the Wyoming sightings are from Dogman Encounters Radio, so you can read about those there. I'll link to those. And now let's move on to the stories. This story comes from AboveTopSecret.com. I was 16, cruising around at night in the Blacks, a small area where people used to go four-wheeling, now a developed area. This is in East Cheyenne, Wyoming, between the area known as Sun Valley and Lincoln Valley Auto Salvage. I was driving in an easterly direction on a dirt road and saw some kind of wolf-like creature in my headlights approximately 60 yards in front of me. My first thought was coyote, but it wasn't. It seriously looked like a werewolf from the movies. I only saw it for a couple of seconds. The thing glanced halfway at me, and my lights reflected on its eyes, which had a bright yellow glow. And it ran off over a hill, but it scared the crap out of me. I rolled up both windows and locked my doors and started turning my truck to see if I could catch it in the headlights again. I didn't see it again, and I wasn't about to go any further. Like I said, I was scared shitless. I ended up turning around to the nearest neighborhood by a couple of street lamps, unlocked my door and bailed out, and immediately scrambled to the ground to look under the truck. Much like bailing off your bed as a kid, leaping halfway across the room and jumping down to look under the bed just to prove there's really nothing there. I still laugh about it. I had to look crazy to anyone in that neighborhood who saw me. To best describe what I saw was like a wolf, but it was more like a movie werewolf. If it had stood straight, it would have been about 5 feet tall. It wasn't completely covered with hair, if any at all. I remember it had a dog-like face with the cheek tufts and shorter, pointy ears, as well as a snout like a dog. Its arms were like an orangutan, and its hind legs were shorter than human. Like I said, it looked like a movie werewolf, except it wasn't all huge in the shoulders and neck like you see in a lot of comic werewolves. This story comes from Reddit.com. I believe the author has also been on Dogman Encounters Radio. Not sure, but feel I recognize it. My roommate, a guy we'll call Jim, spent his high school years in a little town in eastern Wyoming. I can't recall the name of the town, but it was the kind of place that most people had forgotten about since the trains had stopped coming through. It was a weird little town, and most of the people living there seemed to be very paranoid. A lot of parents would not let their children play outside after dark, and all unfamiliar faces were regarded with suspicion. Since the town was miles away from the nearest McDonald's or movie theater or shopping mall, there was nothing for young people to do but get shit-faced drunk. That's what Jim and his friends were planning to do on the night that this story takes place. A fellow classmate was having a kegger at his parents' house that night, which was about 20 miles out of town on a dirt road somewhere. Jim had reservations about driving out there in the dark because that general area was known to be sort of creepy at night. But his friends really wanted to go, and he was the only one with a car, so after some coaxing, Jim and about 5 of his friends piled into his Buick and head out of town. About half an hour later, they realize that they are lost. They can't find the road that they are supposed to turn on, and it's too dark to read any of the signs. They haven't seen any houses or cars for a while, so they figure they must have taken the wrong turn somewhere and decide to head back to the main road. After turning the car around and driving in the opposite direction for a few miles, Jim spots something in the middle of the road up ahead. His friend in the passenger seat notices it at the same time and says, "What the fuck is that, dude?" At first they can't tell what they're looking at, but as the car draws nearer to the big black shape in the middle of the road, it starts to look like a mass of fur. Jim thinks it must be an animal, and it looks big enough to do damage to his car, so he slows down and stops the car about 20 feet away from the thing. At this point, it is completely illuminated by his headlights, but neither he nor his passengers can figure out what the heck kind of animal it might be. Since it hasn't moved, they assume it must be dead and start to argue over who will have to drag it to the side of the road. That's when the thing starts to move. They all fall silent and watch as it stirs, then suddenly stands up. Jim would always preface the next part of the story with, "I know this sounds crazy, but..." He says he can't really describe what he saw, because he had never seen anything like it before. The closest he can come is this. The thing, whatever it was about 7 feet tall when it rose to its full height. Its body was shaped like a human male, but it was covered with a thick, dark fur. The head, he said, and I watched the goosebumps break out on his arms as he said it. The head was not human. It looked almost like a jackal or a German shepherd, with a long snout and pointed ears, and its eyes were glowing in the headlights that way a cat's eyes sometimes glow. It was staring right at them. Jim doesn't know how long he stared back at the thing before he noticed that it was clutching a dead rabbit in one of his enormous hands. He had barely had time to register this bit of information when the creature suddenly flung the dead rabbit away and took a step towards the teenagers in the car. Everyone screamed, and Jim slammed the car into reverse, made a U-turn and got the heck out of there. Needless to say, they didn't make it to that party that night. This comes from paranormal@about.com. This story took place near Iron Bog Lake in Idaho around July 2001. My family and I went on a survival trip, which is a simulation of getting lost in the woods with minimal and limited gear. We arrived at the base at 6:30 p.m. and we had a 3-hour hike ahead of us. As we were walking up the trail, I noticed faint howling sounds, and I also heard rocks falling down the side of the trail, but I couldn't see where they were coming from. The hike taking longer than we thought. We arrived at the site around 10:30-11, so the sun had already gone down. First we get a good fire going, made with flint. Then we made a tent out of a tarp and a few sticks we found during the walk. At around 11:25 we got settled, and then I noticed the howling again. I didn't think much of it. 5 minutes later we heard the bushes moving. We then saw wolf-like figures walking about 20 yards away. My dad pulled out his .22 pistol, loaded it and put it in his pocket. By this time my brother and I were kind of freaked out. At 11:46 we saw a Native American dressed in fur walking where the dog had walked. He stopped in his tracks right as I saw him. He stared at me with these big, glowing brown eyes, and then continued walking, and soon vanished into the woods. After this, my dad, brother, and I talked it over and decided he had probably lost his wolf and was searching for it. although I did think it was strange to have a huge and powerful animal like that, but I ignored the thought and we all went to sleep. I had these weird dreams about the wolf and the man living together forever in evil. I woke up sometime between 3 and 4 a.m. to hear very deep breathing. At first I thought it was my dad or brother, but then it got louder and closer. I finally got enough guts to get up and investigate, but I wish I hadn't because the mere thought still scares me. I saw the wolf 10 feet away from me, eating the remains of a deer. When the wolf saw me, it sprinted into the bushes. I expected to see the wolf come out the other side, but instead the fur-covered Indian walked out. I stood there staring into his eyes for what felt like hours. He then suddenly ran into the forest. I quickly got back in the makeshift tent, grabbed the pistol, and stayed as still as I could until the sun rose. I've had dreams about it since. I've only told my brother and my close Native American friend about that horrific night. My native friend told me it was a skinwalker. Yeah, it really doesn't get any more skinwalkery than that. Ew. Well, that was all for this episode, but I'm gonna link to the Dogman Encounters episode that occurred somewhere in between Idaho and Wyoming during a snowstorm. It was a very, very creepy encounter about a man who was, well, I don't know if I could use the term attacked, but yeah, he was kind of attacked by a dogman, and he's got the scars to prove it. So I'll link to that in the description as well. You really should check out the description to all videos because there are tons of, well, not tons, but many useful links in there. Link to the map and a link to my pages and a link to all the encounters I'm reading so you can read them yourself if you want to, and links to other relevant pages and sites. And if you've had an encounter and you don't feel like talking to anyone about it because someone might think you're crazy, or someone might figure out who you are even if you're anonymous, or the thing you saw doesn't want you to tell anyone, they have a tendency to send messages like that. But do tell someone. Doesn't have to be me. You can tell me. I'd be very happy to talk to you. But you can tell Vic from Dogman Encounters, or Daniel Stedman at Dogman Diaries, or someone who does this. Just tell someone. Tell them your story. Get it out, because as long as you don't, it's like they have this power over you. As long as you don't, you're going to have those nightmares that you're probably having. And just talk about it with someone who understands. It's the best thing you can ever do. I've heard from so many witnesses how they feel so much better, sometimes after 20, 30, 40 years of keeping something to themselves. As soon as they talk about it to someone who understands, it just melts away and they start to feel much better. So I recommend you talk to someone. And me, for example, you can contact. I have my contact information in the description as well. It's quite simple. It's cloakedhedgehog@gmail.com. Or you can contact me at Facebook or whatever you want. Or contact someone else if you want that. Just talk about it. Break the silence. Break the power they have over you. Alright, that's about it. Take care, everyone, and be safe, and I'll see you next time.